started here since we're at that 6 o'clock hour. Well, hello, folks, and welcome to Roaring Fork Club's Zoom series, a special book club tonight with author and RFC Zone Fly Fishing Guide staff member, Derek Grzelewski. Hi, Derek.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Let's give our Zoomers a good introduction of who you are, Derek, and where you're from, et cetera, and what brought you to us. First of all, Derek is a published author of 4 books on New Zealand and fly fishing. His first book, Trout Diaries, I have that right here. This was a year of fly fishing in New Zealand. This came out in 2011. That was followed up by a second book called Trout Bohemia, published in 2013. And then last year, his book, Trout Dreams, came out. And then his fourth book, Fly Fishing in New Zealand, What You Need to Know, just came out this summer. In fact,
I have it here.
Thanks for that. He's also the author of numerous articles and other publications like magazines, including New Zealand Geographic, Fly Fisherman, Smithsonian Magazine, and Fish and Game New Zealand. I should mention that some articles deal with other topics like climbing, adventure travel, and natural history. Derek was born in Poland, but he's been a lifelong New Zealander, where his home for many years was Wanaka on the South Island. He did a lot of guiding there and is also founding member of his own fly fishing academy called the Wanaka Fly Fishing Academy. He was a writer before he was a fisherman, and his breakout book, Trout Diaries, really put him on the map as an author about New Zealand fly fishing. His books are part travelogue within New Zealand, part tutorial, and part characters met and fished along life's fishing journey. So Derek, take us back. You're living in New Zealand, you're fishing a lot. What got you to write that first book that got published in 2011, Trout Diaries? Did you feel like a book like that on fly fishing was needed in your country of New Zealand?
I was approached by a publisher, and basically they known about my magazine work, and they said, would you like to do something for us? And I was immediately thought of, fly fishing in New Zealand. There hasn't really been done much by that time. And there are a lot of how-tos and, books of flies and, where to go and kind of guidebook type things, but nothing really in lines of, I still think Tom McGuane's The Longest Silence is kind of my favorite fly fishing book of all times. And I thought, be nice to do something like that in New Zealand, because New Zealand is, for those who don't know, probably the #1 trout destination in the world. And I thought, it would be nice to do something like that, travel book that has all the elements. It has the fishing, but also the characters, the location, some history, background. There's really interesting stories of how trout came to New Zealand, and then salmon as well, Chinook salmon. And so that was my kind of inspiration. And then, of course, trout, one of the things I love about trout is the cycles of life, the cycles of bugs, and that go around the calendar. And naturally, it seems like, a year of fly fishing, going through the seasons of how they change. You have the cicadas, you have the mayflies, you have all the other things, the spawning runs. And to me, it's a really beautiful kind of cycles of life that always fascinated me. And I thought, one of the greatest thing I find in fly fishing is to follow those cycles and to learn about them. So because then, you are in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that first book of yours. I first encountered it on one of our hosted trips. Greg and I take these golf and fishing trips to New Zealand. We've done one in 2013, 15, and 2017. But I was in the Auckland airport in 2013 at the conclusion of our trip, and I saw your book in the library there. The gift store there in Auckland. And I should have bought it, but I started thinking, I'll just wait till I get back to the US and I'll just buy a bunch of these on Amazon and give them out as gifts. Big mistake. It's a little bit of a harder book to get your hands on these days. I do have a copy. It's out of print, but it's soon to be in a reprint situation. But it's a good lead in for talking about your second book. So your first book comes out I think it was widely received, et cetera. Did you feel like after it having been out, was there now an audience for you to attempt a second book? And that second book was Trout Bohemia?
I didn't really think that at the time, but after the book, the Trout Diaries came out, I started getting a lot of correspondence from readers and from just obscure places, Chile, Finland, Japan, and somehow readers really connected with those books. And one of the things they said, was the kind of a theme was that, I've never put my feelings about fly fishing into words, but if I did, these would be the words. And so, of course, then I started asking, are you going to do another one? And I'm like, well, I don't really have more to say. But then I started thinking about it, and this, I was guiding and fishing, and at that level where you're spending, 100 days a year on the river, and very quickly, more material was available, and I think those books, these projects, they have their own life cycles. And, when it's ready, it's there, and it's there. So that's how Trout Bohemia came to be.
Well, let's talk about that third book of yours, Trout Dreams. You write in the prologue that letters and emails came in from fans of the first two books. And then there was this one woman from Carbondale who wrote to you asking about New Zealand trout. And then this really becomes the subject of that third book. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, so I was guiding, a full-on season in New Zealand, and I got this email from this lady in Colorado here, and saying, I read your books and I love them. I love the approach you have, and it's this kind of trout bum, let's say, trout bohemian approach, where we go out and camp and really live the river life. We just don't just kind of go to drive by locations. It's a lot more kind of total immersion in a subject. And so I was already, the season was busy and booked out, and I said, well, let's talk about next year. And so we did, and we talked through the winter, started corresponding, and she said, she's done a lot of fishing. She's been to Christmas Island several times, and Mexico, and a lot of saltwater. And then with her father, she fished the Dean River for steelhead a couple of times. And then so, I haven't really done that New Zealand thing. And so we started planning it, and then it was kind of by then we got to know each other a little bit better, and it was like shaping like this 2 months long blind date, because she I said, come over for a couple of weeks, because it's a long way to travel, and then we'll fish some more together. And what it ended up being was like this trout safari, like the old Hemingway style, except that we weren't hunting game, we were fishing, and just really camping out and living the river life. And so after 2 months, it was so good, I came back with her to Colorado and tried the Colorado winter. And then the following 3 seasons, we did the same thing, doing the New Zealand fishing season and the Colorado winter. And that was 5 years ago. And now, we married, and I'm here now with her. And that was the subject of the third book. And, in the due process, we had our immigration interview for my green card, and I brought the book along, pretty much the only thing that I brought. And the guy who was our interviewing officer, he kind of looked at it and said, in my entire career, this is the most convincing piece of evidence I've ever seen. And that was it. It was like, yeah, here you go. Welcome to America.
That is good. I do want to ask about before she got to you, she developed her own cast, and then you wanted to give her some new instruction on that casting, and you explained some of her casting early on when she first arrived in New Zealand as like punk rock casting, kind of a la Sex Pistols.
It was her line. He says, you're referring to my casting. So your casting is like poetry in motion. Mine is more like punk rock. And, we had to do a lot of work on that, because, I'm also a certified casting instructor. And it always seemed to me like the casting is is like your entry, into this higher levels of fishing. And unfortunately, and I've never written about it at length in my books, where the way people learn to cast is someone show you this is how you do it, and it's assumed that you know. But it's like a golf swing, it's like a ski turn, it's like your swim stroke. There's a lot to it. And the better you can get at it, the more you will enjoy the fishing. And that's, was kind of a theme of my fly fishing academy in New Zealand. Like, yeah, you can get lucky, you catch some big fish here and there if you got good guides. But the only way to catch more fish and bigger fish is to become a better angler. And casting is, to me, it's like, this is it. And there are many levels in that. And you can always get better. You can always refine it more. And especially in New Zealand, where, we talk about this, or your guides will tell you about this first cast presentation. And, you imagine yourself, you just, arrived at this destination and you're watching like the biggest trout you've ever seen in your life. And your guide is telling you have one shot at it, and you either catch it or you spook it. And it is true at the kind of intermediate level, but if you do put enough time into your casting and really refine it, you can cast as many times as you want, and you without spooking that fish, and you really magnify and multiply your opportunities and make the most of them.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Something that strikes me is when I was over there, I think it was on the second trip, the guide let me know, hey, don't cast right over that large trout near his nose. Put it out to his right or to his left, because he's big enough that his field of vision is actually larger than a small trout. Rather than spook him by sticking it right on his nose, put it out to the side where he can have a chance to see it, not be spooked by it. Just get over to it.
There is a strategy, especially with bigger flies like cicadas or hoppers, where the fish perceives movements and disturbance in the water through their lateral line. It's a line that runs along their flanks, from head down to tail. And so if you throw a big fly right in front of them, which is very accurate, you kind of confront them with that fly, and they still might take it, but there is a different strategy where you actually, and only works with those big flies, when you slap it kind of to the side, almost behind them, and you trigger this predatory, they turn around like a jet boat, and I've played with that in season when appropriate, and they turn around and they don't really look so closely, because they're sitting there in ambush, expecting those bugs to fall in the water, and they like listening out for them. So if you can slap a cicada, just off to the side, they'll take it without looking what it is.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I love how the fish in New Zealand, in those remote streams, they'll turn around and swim down the stream to go get their fly. In this case, it's our fly, but so unlike our fish, where we guide and tell people that our fish aren't going to move 1 foot. Let me get to another question here for you. Also in Trout Dreams, you talked about how you tested out the relationship with Jennifer, and you wanted to see how things go. And then you write in there, I'm going to quote you here, fishing with a girl is, well, very, very different. Could I bring you into chapter 12 there at Trout Dreams? And can you just read us that paragraph there on page 165? While you're looking that up, I just want to mention, we have a lot of ladies that fish at the Roaring Fork Club. We feel really fortunate about that. And I think we're pretty much setting a record in the West. And I know we as guides basically prefer sometimes the women over the men, but go ahead and get to your passage and we can discuss more about that when we get there.
Okay, here we go. Lipsticks, nail files, eyeliners, a yoga necklace and the matching earrings, hairbrush, combs and hair ties, and of course mirrors, one double-sided with a magnifier, and a spare one too, though the phone's camera might work as well, but only in emergencies. Hat for the fishing and another one for getting there, both with matching buffs, and a shirt color coordinated with socks. A safari mini skirt with inbuilt shorts in case it's windy. Watch out, Trout, this girl is going fishing. Then a moment of doubt. Oh crap, she says, I forgot my gink. If you got any I can borrow? Of course, I brought a spare one for you. You mean it? Really? Oh, you're wonderful. And you got my rod too, right? Your rod and your reel, your waders and boots and everything else too. Fabulous, darling. Have you seen my fly box? No, but I've got enough flies for both of us. Fishing with a girl is very different.
And in many times, such a good way. Again, we've had so many instances at the Fork where we have multiple boat floats, all with ladies. There's some relationships at the club where the woman spouse fishes a lot more than the man for various reasons, whether it's he likes the golf more or he just doesn't take to the fishing. But we're certainly happy that Jennifer took to all the fishing, wanted to get to New Zealand to meet you. Another thing about New Zealand, want to get into the idea of the clear waters of that country and the sight fishing opportunities. Just got to be some of the clearest water in the world. A lot of people have asked me, so what's it like? If you go to New Zealand and you fish, what's it like? I'm an outsider. I'm somebody who visits that country. And the way I explain it to people is it is the best place in the world for sight fishing to large trout in a wild place. I have been to Alaska. You can definitely catch more fish day by day. In fact, the saying in Alaska really is it's catching, not fishing. But New Zealand is just kind of a special breed of the kind of experience it has to offer. And can you talk about some of those clear rivers over there?
Yeah, so one of my favorite kind of sayings is that New Zealand, for anglers from around the world, New Zealand is what the Himalayas are for the mountaineers, climbers. And it's like that's where you go for the highest challenge and the greatest rewards. And the challenge there is that by comparison with Colorado, we don't have so many fish. I mean, but they're a lot bigger. They're a lot more spaced out. I mean, you have to maybe walk or drive or fly, in a helicopter. It's not like you park up like here, you go to one spot and you can fish there all day and without moving. You really have to, we hike a lot, we walk, and then we look for the fish, and we try to see them first. I mean, this is the whole sight fishing part of it, not because we kind of like to be, snobbish about it, but it is a technique that really, it's a necessity because there's a lot of water where there aren't any fish. And so, you'd be just beating water and not, wasting your time basically. So you want to hike, we just walk really slowly and try to see the fish. And of course, that's the ideal scenario. That's not always possible, some depending on visibility and stuff, but that's what we try to do. And then when you see that fish, you have to kind of, it's like hunting, you got your shot. And if the better you are at it, the more shots you might get. And sometimes, like when I fish with my friends, I mean, they kind of assume that you're there with the first cast, so we cast and there's strategies as well, which I write about in this book here. But, if you don't have to be there with the first cast, but there are ways you can get around it. And then without spooking the fish, so you get more opportunities. And then, if you're kind of good enough, you get to, change flies and try different flies, put a fly out 3 times and the fish hasn't taken it. It's like, okay, so it's probably not going to take it. So you change the fly, and then you kind of, the game continues. What is really cool and exciting about sight fishing at this level is, it's never boring. Like you are always, from the moment you start to the end of the day, you are engaged with what you're doing, with the fishing, with the fish, with, you spot them, you try to see them, you cast to them, you see how they react, they come up, they look, they refuse, they take, there is never just like a boring moment. And no matter whether you catch the fish or not, you fully engage in what you're doing. It's very intense. And that's what I love about it. It's like, and it's often, the classic angler's kind of greeting is, any luck, and I'm like, luck's got nothing to do with it. Luck is like what kind of activity you will find on a day that you're fishing. Like, is there a hatch? Is it windy? It's these things that you cannot control, and they just happen. Some days it's on, other days, as you like to say, you cannot buy a trout. But it's like you there, you still at your best, and you're engaging with this, and that's the luck has got nothing to do with it. You can put the cast to a fish or not. Luck is like, are the fish active today? And so we try to eliminate, with skills, we eliminate everything that we can, eliminate all the variables, and then leave the rest to the magic that happens on the river.
Yeah, one of the things I was struck by being over in New Zealand is the willingness of the guides to use those tungsten bead heads. So a common setup for you guys over there is 1 or 2 tungsten bead heads underneath a big, nice, fat ball of real New Zealand wool. It's always kind of like a grayish yellow in color, but the guides, so often you will look in the boxes that we bring over there, and you immediately want to get to those tungsten bead heads. Those rivers over there are so deep, and those flies have to get down so fast. By the way, it makes me laugh sometimes to see what the guides' flies look like, because sometimes they're even 2 tungsten beads with outlandish colors, red, white, and blue with rubber legs. I look at some of these flies and I'm like, gosh, they would never work for us back in Colorado. But one of the things I have done is brought those ideas back to Colorado, tying with tungsten some of my nymphs to just try to get down to trout a little bit faster. I just can't believe how much tungsten is used in New Zealand.
One of the reasons, is that we don't really use split shot or lead or any weights. It's a lot of places actually illegal. I mean, I don't know why, but so it is the fly often that takes it. It's the weight as well. And so there are flies that are, the body of the nymph is actually built segmented from different size tungsten beads. And I mean, it's not a pretty thing to cast. And in fact, you can break a rod tip if you don't open your loop. If it hits your rod tip, it'll break it. It's so, and you have to have heavier rods. And it is not always a necessity. It's kind of like, one of the things in New Zealand is the diversity of waters and places that you find trout. And some of it's backcountry rivers, some of it is spring creeks, some of it's lakes, lowland rivers with epic hatches and stuff, and you kind of work around that with your gear and whatever is suitable for particular condition. But the great thing is you can be on a backcountry river, and then within an hour you can be on lowland spring creek. And so what one of the books I wrote years ago was a collection of my magazine stories called The Smallest Continent, and it was basically, the idea that New Zealand has a geographical diversity of an entire continent, and it does. There are orange groves on almost coral reefs up north, and penguins and icebergs at the southern end. The icebergs come; they're not there all the time, but they have been seen floating around. So, and you have this geographical diversity of trout rivers. So it's not just that we have big trout, but it's just the environment in which we pursue them is just so diverse, from one coast to another, to, the desert in between and the Alps. And it's just, within a very short drive, you can be just totally change your scenery.
Yeah, I love your access over there too, to some of those remote river locations, which, by the way, just have the coolest Maori names, the Mokomokanui and the Rangatiki and the Rotorua. But that helicopter access, before I ever went over there, I thought it was kind of some kind of upsell out of the lodges, some kind of foo-foo, take a helicopter to your fishing beat. But I really learned after 3 different trips over there that if you want to access some of those most prime river beats in New Zealand, and some of which are actually in Maori lands, undeveloped Maori-owned lands, The only way in is that helicopter, which is an exciting ride. And sometimes, just less than 10 minutes will get you into a river valley that is just remarkable with absolutely no road access.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you can get there on foot, but it's, it can be an absolute epic. And I've done some of those trips, and you're basically out there for, 10 days carrying everything with you. And it's, it's really hardcore kind of river crossings but yeah, if you can get there in a helicopter and also, just pick the best spots out of, the guides will, they'll know where the big fish are, and you can be walking stretches there, there aren't that many fish, because it's not like the frying pan where you the fish are kind of congregating around you. I mean, you really have to find them, and this whole hunting thing of you just basically go and look, and then you find a fish, and then you try to catch it. And the helicopter access makes it all so much easier. And, you can be back for cocktails at the lodge, which is, if you've done those epic trips like I have, it's a very appealing idea.
Yeah. In the first 3 books you embed a lot of instruction into maybe like a half a chapter. It might be devoted to casting, sometimes bugs. Is that how you finally decided? I was kind of surprised to hear when you told me, hey, you've got an instruction book coming out, which is, what you need to know. Did you feel like, or did your publisher feel like that was something needed to come out, in New Zealand, a pure instruction on fly fishing?
It was more the readers again, because I get a lot of feedback. I mean, I get emails, not every day, but, every few days, and over the years, almost a decade now. And a lot of guys and anglers are asking, like, how do you play the game at this level? Because, I mentioned before, a lot of it assumed, like, when you see a fish, you're just there with the first cast and you say, what happened. But for anglers that, perhaps don't have the time to spend, 100 days a year on the river for 20 years, like we have, it's just, how do you do it? And, there's a lot to know in fly fishing. And a lot of it's kind of interesting, but it's not essential. And so the idea came out of this reader's feedback of, like, what is it that you really have to know? Like, when you want to go fishing in New Zealand and anywhere else in the world for that matter, because this book, it's based in New Zealand, but New Zealand fishing, sight fishing, is so technically challenging that if you can play at that level, you can go anywhere in the world, and with some minor adjustments to gear and technique, you can fish for anything. You can fish for permit, you can fish for any saltwater tarpon, you can fish for salmon. It's just the idea in this book was just to distill, like, the essence of skills that are essential, they're kind of universal in fly fishing. And so I put this together. And so, like, there are 3 chapters in casting, at different levels. Like how you start, then it's kind of advanced level, and there's an expert, level where you just don't have to think about it. You don't, like, we don't think about how, you just look around, see where you are, what is the situation, what is the back cast, what is, what needs to happen. And then you do it. And a lot of those casts don't even have names, they're just like, you just so connected to what's going on, your fly line, your rod, that you just do what needs to be done. And but also, I had clients who were, throwing, Latin names of mayflies at me, and I said, that's cool. We had a little chat about that, and then we get to the water, and they can't really present those Latin name mayflies to the fish. So, like, so the Latin names are cool and they're interesting, and life cycles of bugs are interesting, but they're not essential. Like, what you need to know is, like, there are these stages, of mayflies. That's what they look like. That's how they fish. That's how they are different. You know, nymph, emerger, dry fly, spent, for example, and going talking about mayflies. And that is what you have to know, you know, and you have to know what really matters is the size. What really matters is the color and the life stage. And then, you know, how you call it, who cares? You know, like that's, you can do that, you know, having your scotch by the fire and studying different bugs and things, but it is not essential. So I've just distilled that, like, this is what you need to know. And the rest of it's just fun to know. And, you know, I'm not saying that you shouldn't learn that or, you know, explore that, but this is what you need to know. And then you show up on the river and we love you. You know, we see you cast and like, this is going to be a good day.
Is that when you step up and you say, I'm guiding him or I'm guiding her? I'll see you at the end of the day.
Yeah, pretty much. You know, like if you're, I know a lot of our members, you know, they guide it, and you know, the best thing you can do for your trip, for your guide, is to put some time into the techniques. And then, you know, we can do everything else. We can take care of everything else, but we'll see you cast and you like, there's a fish and bang, and you're there or near it, you know, near enough. I mean, we're not looking for perfection, but we're looking like, you know, hey, help us help you, you know. And that, and like in New Zealand is really critical. And I've seen it so many times where I have, you know, clients, guests that they come and, you know, they're so psyched on the big fish, and they read the magazines and they read the books and they watched YouTubes, and then they, you know, the last kind of 40 feet, you know, Flip Pallet had this really nice story about in the last 40 feet. And so like you can travel all around, you know, halfway around the world to your destination, and you can buy your way until that last 40 feet, you know, and that's where you have to earn it. And that's, you know, the guide said like, well, there's a fish, put a cast to it, you know, and that's what often it falls apart. And I've had guys, you know, like a former president of one of the Trout Unlimited chapters, you know, came to fish with me, and he just fell apart. And on the first, like, he's a good fisherman, he's experienced, but he hasn't experienced that sight fishing kind of game. And he just totally fell apart. And, you know, first couple of days, and like, okay, so this is where you're at. We're only going to go up from that. We're going to build up. And, you know, at the end of his trip, he was doing everything that needed to be done. And so one of my kind of passions is to, you know, prepare people for that. So like, don't go to New Zealand or, you know, Slovenia or Iceland unprepared, because you're going to waste part of your trip just getting tuned up to what's required there. And you can do it at home, and it's easy and it's fun, you know. And when you get there, you're like at the top of your game, and you know, you're going to have a lot more enjoyable trip.
Yeah, you know, sometimes I think we all mistakenly think that what we're going to need on an international trip, a destination trip, is a giant cast, you know, a long cast, the Hail Mary of fly fishing, right? But so often, a lot of these fish are within our casting range, you know, including for intermediates, as long as that cast is clean at short distances. You know, that's very important. Nobody should get too intimidated that, you know, the longest cast on the clearest New Zealand stream is what guides are looking for, how you catch fish over there. Yeah, it's just important to just keep it clean at short distances.
Now we have a saying, like, you know, someone asking, what are the fish feeding on today? I said, accuracy. Accuracy.
Yeah, but then you got to back that up with an eat. Otherwise, they look at you and say, oh, what's not fly choice?
Yeah. But you know, there's a lot of things there. I mean, I had that too, where, you know, we're fishing a hatch, and the guy says, you know, the fish won't eat the bug, you know, and he's there with his cast kind of every time, but the fly is dragging, you know, and it's like, it's so small, it's hard to see, but, and, you know, I'm like, well, do you want me to show you? And he says, sure, you know, and I cast and I catch it. And it's kind of, I mean, it's good for the ego, but it's not so good for kind of our trip, because, you know, there's a lot more skills than just getting the fly there. You know, it's just how you get it there, how it drifts, and especially with dry fly. And, you know, one of the things I kind of developed to explain to people is this kind of drag-free window. I mean, we're getting pretty technical here, but, you know, like you throwing this big cast, it doesn't all have to be perfect, but there is probably like 5 feet, and you place that 5 feet where you want it, you know, in front of the fish and slightly behind to cover, you know, it's like, and then over that 5 feet, it has to be perfect. And what happens behind, you know, you don't want to probably rip it out of the water to scare it off, but you just pick it up gently and you can recast. And it's just like, you know, that's another kind of, not just throwing your line and fly at the river, but actually, so, you know, where you want it and how you want it. And then it happens.
There's another cool thing in your books where, you know, if sometimes we tire of technical language in fishing books, you do a good job of, in each of those books, putting in a story or two or more of side stories in New Zealand. It could be the introduction of the red deer in New Zealand. I believe I remember in Trout Dreams, you talk about salmon and the stocking of salmon at one time in that country. Those are nice little breaks in the action sometimes, and also from the actual storyline, where you walk away at the end of reading one of your books having learned something about a cool esoteric subject.
Mm-hmm. You know, from my writing background, you know, and I've written for, you know, a number of magazines, including the Smithsonian magazine here and Fly Fisherman and so on. You know, I'm kind of a generalist, and I think fly fishing is a really cool way to travel. You know, like, yeah, you get your skills up and you know, you do what you can, but it's also, there's a lot more going on than catching fish, you know, and some of the aspects of it are the people we meet, the places we go, and, you know, the places kind of speak to us. And also just I see fly fishing more like, you know, the way we relate to our natural world. You know, we kind of deliberately take a harder challenge because there are easier ways to catch fish if you want to just catch a fish. But we just kind of come in with this higher bar, if you like, and higher challenge. And when we succeed, it means a lot more, right? And also, you know, I think in Trout Bohemia I wrote about this, where, you know, your fly rod is almost like a diplomatic passport. You know, you can show up places, you can ask questions. You know, you kind of on this sacred quest, if you like, that means nothing to anyone else, but means a lot to you. And you kind of, you know, you're harmless, you're innocent, and people help you, but show you places. I mean, I had so many amazing experiences with ranchers. They'll, you know, bring you milk in the morning for your coffee, you know, and tell you where the holes are, where the fish are, because, you know, they're there. One thing that maybe our audience need to know, there is no private water in New Zealand, so you basically can go anywhere you want. There's a thing called Queen's Chain, which is 20 yards either side of the river, high tide, high water level. And so when you're on that stretch, you can go all the way to the sea if you want. And getting to that, you know, there are access points, but once you're on the river, you basically, it's public water, all of it, which is why you end up in some ranchers' backyards and, you know, asking them for access. And they take you, they show you around, and you know, it's a lot more going on than just how many fish and how big, and you know, it's just like entire river life, I call it, you know, of the experiences and the places where fly fishing takes you, and the people you meet, and, you know, scientists and conservationists and you know, super good anglers and real goofballs as well, you know. And it's just a complete package. And I do a lot of other things, you know, I ski, I paraglide, I kite, but none of those activities really has the multi-layer kind of richness of fly fishing. I find there's so much going on there.
Yeah, in just about 5 minutes here, we're going to take the last part of this call here with Derek to do some questions and answers from Derek. That'll take us up to the 7 o'clock hour Mountain Time. But yeah, your statement about that, about, that international passport of the rod tube, you just, once that's hanging out your backpack or out your briefcase, you seem to just get a little different friendly treatment. You need to be open to the strangers that want to come up to you and ask you a question about where you're going or where you've been. And I think that's probably the funnest part about fly fishing, is just this idea of the interaction you get, and a lot of times with strangers. Years ago, we were on a tarpon trip to Costa Rica, and we stayed at a little B&B for a couple nights, and the retired couple who was running it, the husband asked, would you show my wife how to cast? She's never fished in her life, and she just wants to learn how to cast, on the sand at the water. There's no tarpon in sight. And I just stood out there one evening with cocktails with her and taught her how to cast a 10 weight. And she'll probably never use that cast, but I think she just had so much fun learning hauling techniques and just what fly fishing even is.
I think, we are kind of a tribe, if you like, as fly fishermen and women, and, we speak the same language. And I often find myself, just falling into these conversations. And like one time I was up in Rudai Reservoir in winter, up above Frying Pan, kite skiing, because it's frozen and, it's, and when it's frozen, I can drive over it, and it has, a bunch of snow. And so I'm just having fun there. And there's a lot of people ice fishing there. And I saw this couple who are, had this skidoo and a little trailer, and they're like immersion suits, like they really knew what they were doing. And so the guy's like, oh, well, let me show you a picture, of a fish my wife caught here last week. And I'm like, yeah, okay, let's have a look at it. And he opens up his phone, and this is a lake trout. It's like 40 pounds. And I mean, she's holding it like, like a baby tarpon. I had no idea there were those fish there. And since then I've seen there's even a state record caught, I think last spring. There was a guy fishing from a kayak. He caught a fish that was a lot bigger than that. So, I mean, you would never know if you were just not open to that, to these interactions, just, random things happening. You run into someone and I'm like, I wonder how can you catch those fish on the fly, and there is a beginning of a project here, you can see how you start figuring it out, and then, maybe revisit at some later point.
Yeah, I'm going to, in the next minute or two here, I'm going to go ahead and unmute the group. So if you don't intend to ask a question or anything, and just, keep your mic muted for the last 15 minutes. And maybe with a show of hand, we could do a question. But as people do that, and I unmute here in a second, it reminds me of being up in the UP of Michigan, probably 4 years ago or so, and I was with my brother and cousin, and we thought we were on a brookie trip. We thought we were on a guys fly fishing for brookies in the beginning of spring trip. And we found directions to a local river, and we went down to it. It was feeding into Lake Superior. And we're walking down with fly rods for brookies. And here comes a guy with a steelhead on a stringer. And we asked, where'd that come from? What a great question, right? Did you catch that here? And he said, guys, there's no brookies in this stream. All the steelhead are in right now. The steelhead run is on. It's right here. And I remember looking at my brother and my cousin and said, back to the car. We've got to re-rig. We were very happy to have run into that guy and ended up catching a few steelhead down in there. Okay, we're going to spend these last 15 minutes going ahead and trying to do some questions, and just got to manage this a little bit. If you have a question, and maybe if you could just raise your hand and then I can unmute you. I'll just send you a message that unmutes you. So I'll just open that up right now. Okay, Mike, let me get to you here. you'll see on your screen.
Yeah, should be okay now.
Yeah, you're on, Mike.
Great. Hi, Derek.
Hello.
Hey, JL.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, Dr. Addis.
Good. So, kind of just a technical question on the art of writing as opposed to the art of fishing, because they're very similar endeavors at some kind of primal level, I think. But do you journal? So when you're putting together your thoughts for a book and you're reconstructing some of the stories and narratives and experiences, do you write that down on most trips and then collect those into your narratives for a book later, or do you sit down 3 years and say, okay, this is what I've done in the last 3 years, let's write about it?
So, I've always pretty much been on assignment for someone or something. I'm always looking for stories, and it's this whole idea of being, travel writer, not just in fishing, but I'm constantly looking. It gives you that kind of hunger for experiences, for finding interesting people, interesting places. So I've always, looking for ideas, looking for stories, what could work, and I'm kind of working on those, and some of them will later, make their way into a book, and some of might not, or into another book. I've got a couple of other books that got nothing to do with fishing, and they're just collections of my magazine stories. But I've always tried to, have at least, it doesn't matter how long the story is, but it's kind of a unit of experience. I'm going to write this up for this magazine or that magazine. And so I'm constantly working on stuff. I'm constantly thinking, what could improve this? How, what else can I add to it? What else do I need? When you get into the storytelling, there are certain elements that a story needs. It needs dialogues, it needs kind of backstory, it needs background, location, you need to put it somewhere. It needs to have a timeline. So you're constantly kind of working on those, when you talk to someone and, oh, that sounds interesting. So you follow this lead. Okay, might not get you anywhere, or it might, an example of that in Trout Diaries, there's a guy that I met, and someone just mentioned this crazy guy that was, yeah, thank you. That was, an expert on stoneflies, and then like the only guy in New Zealand. And it just, someone mentioned it and said, I'm going to find this guy. And I did. And it's a whole chapter in the book. And it's just, something sparks your interest and you follow that lead. And some of them don't go anywhere, but when they do go somewhere, you end up, it's like finding a nugget.
Yeah, very good. I really love the way you write. You're a gifted writer, and we fish together, so I know how good you are there. But to translate an experience that is, can be technically overwhelming for a beginner or even an intermediate, to translate that to a narrative that makes sense to a reader is just a very unique set of gifts, and you're very good at it. So
thank you. I think it's also a skill that can be trained, like when I started, in 97, I think, I wrote the story, and it wasn't as good as it could have been, but then you learn. It's every time, the learning curve at the beginning, it's almost vertical. Like, you write a chapter and then you write another one, and you already don't like the first chapter because you've learned so much.
Right.
Just, and then slowly it never flattens, but it slows down somewhat. And then you go, I'm happy with, like, if I wrote that now, I would have written it differently, but maybe I hope the quality would be similar,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Does anybody else have a question for Derek right now?
JL, I realize COVID has changed the whole world for we don't know how much longer, but you have any other club fishing trips on the books for the next 18 months, or we can just gonna wait and see how things pan out?
Great question. New Zealand, shoot, I'd be packing my bag right now. We had a sold out trip for November coming up. Obviously, we have pushed that into next year, same time, and we're hopeful that will take place. I think we'll stay sold out on that New Zealand trip. We very well could lose, maybe one couple or something out of that. just because, it's a year later. But it does bring up that interesting idea, here in Colorado, I'm sure you heard, if you're here right now, 10 inches of snow on the ground yesterday morning. It was just crazy. Below zero wind chills last night. I think we'll see the same tonight.
Yeah.
And then this whole idea of opposite seasons, if you leave in November for New Zealand, you get down there to the Southern Hemisphere, and by God, you're back in spring. It's the most beautiful time of year down there. The rivers are coming down. The fish are very hungry after a long season of being, both winter and then having endured runoff. And that idea that when you do get out there for those November trips, those spring trips in New Zealand, your trip with your guide is often the very first fishing in that particular beat of the season, which gets you pretty excited, because those presentations to those trout in the early season, kind of like here, always go a lot better than when you're the later presenters. But I should move on to someone else. If anybody else has a question for Derek.
I can just add something here, JL, to that. Unlike in Colorado, there's a number of months where the rivers are closed in New Zealand. And so they open on the 1st of October and some of them 1st of November. And so you have this early season fishing, which is great. And then the Christmas time is sort of, this national holiday vacation for everyone. And for in like 6 weeks, the whole country's out and fishing and swimming, and kids are, down floating in tubes, and it kind of disturbs the waters a lot. But then in February, it's like a complete reset with the cicada season, and the fish just forget all the disturbance they had, and they just kind of lose a lot of their caution with those big bugs around. It's an exciting time to be there as well.
Yeah, if we could take one last question here before we conclude, we'd be happy to do that. Just raise your hand if you do have a question. If not, that's okay. I know we've covered a lot of ground here on this book club series. And I do want to thank Amy French for putting together this book club this evening with Derek Grzelewski. Thank you, Amy. I see that you just got onto the call. And we covered a lot of great ground here this evening. We thank Derek for, first of all, writing all these books and then sharing with us the wonders of those books. By the way, the Pro Shop, we do have 2 in stock right now. They're, it's an international book. So it has a little bit smaller way of getting your hands on it. I told you earlier, I learned the hard way thinking I could just get everything I wanted off Amazon. But RFCProShop.com, we currently have 2 of his titles in stock, which include Trout Bohemia and Trout Dreams. We anticipate at some point in the winter getting his new book, Fishing in New Zealand, What You Need to Know, should come in at some point this winter. And then maybe someday you can add to your collection the Trout Diaries. Derek, anything you want to say for the end here?
We have now, I'm here for the next season and thereafter. So, come and fish with us. If you want to get better at anything, if you want to, master the game, there's probably not a better place to do that than at the club, because we have all the facilities from teaching the kids, which I had to learn myself. I've been very, very pure in my approach to fishing, and that kind of I had to learn and this is not going to work here, and some of it, but we can take you all the way from whatever level you want to reach, and we have the resources and the skills, and it's a great place to do it at your leisure. So then when you actually go on a fishing trip, whether it's New Zealand or, you can chasing tarpon or permit or any of those fish that you have to really be on your game, side fishing, do it at the club, work with us, and we will get you up in those skills. Then when you actually on the trip, be at the top of your game.
Thank you. Amy, thank you for jumping on the call here.
Yeah, I was hiding with my phone Zoom here, and I just want to say thanks to, of course, to Derek for joining us, but special thanks to JL for moderating and providing such an interesting evening for everyone. This is our third Zoom series, which have been really popular. We have one more scheduled at this point. That will be Tuesday, November 10th. The Roaring Fork Conservancy will be doing Water in the West Part 2, which is another important part of fishing here in the Roaring Fork Valley.
Well, thank you, Amy, for this book club. Thank you, Derek Grzelewski, for all your time.
Thank you for having me.
And most importantly, thank you to the audience, all you Roaring Fork Club members we all know and love and like, and all any guests that were on the call tonight. And we look forward to seeing you in the future.